Hey guys, um, we're not gonna watch this video because I decided this is gonna be your second video of the week. It's just a crash course video. This is gonna be a pretty easy week in U.S. history. We're just gonna take these notes. You're gonna watch this video on Wednesday, and then you have a three-question quiz. That's all I'm asking of you. Um, because I think next week might be a little, might be a little more. So take it easy this week. We'll hit it hard next week. So, let's start looking at the Cold War and what happened. So, first thing you need to know about Cold War, we have this policy of containment. So, people were so afraid of communism. That was kind of the main part of the Cold War. Is people were just afraid of communism and afraid of the effect it would have on our United States way of life and government and markets and how things go. So they decided, these world leaders, as we were going into this, communism is too powerful to just try and fight and get rid of. So it's going to exist where it is, but it can't spread. We're not going to let it move outside of the Soviet Union and the countries that make up the Warsaw Pact, which we'll get to. Um, there was this whole East versus West mentality, freedom versus tyranny, with the United States versus the Soviet Union. The United States and the Soviet Union came out of World War II as kind of the two main superpowers, and there was a lot of tension back and forth. The Cold War is not really a war. There wasn't one, fighting in one country that we can call a war. We do have like the Korean War, the Vietnam War. There's a bunch of conflicts all throughout the world that happen that fall under the umbrella of the Cold War. So the Cold War is more of an era marked by these little conflicts. Well, they're not little, but these conflicts. Um, People were terrified of communism mainly because they didn't know what it could do, how it could change the way that the world works. Um, there were tons of anti-Soviet and anti-communism propaganda spread throughout the United States and Europe, which only fed more into this fear. Um, but it also helped to build up that we are America. We won't fall to those communists. We won't fall to the Soviets. We're going to make it to the moon first. Like all of that stuff kind of plays into this adverse reaction to communism. So, post World War II life. Things don't just go back to normal after a war like World War II. It takes years and years of rebuilding and fixing your economy and countries helping each other out and reshuffling your government and trying new things because you got to bounce back somehow. The United States had the Marshall Plan. It was named after one of the generals. His plan was basically just to use American supplies and money to help European countries, help Europe rebuild again after the European theater and the bombings and the tank warfare and all of this idea of total warfare that we talked about last week. Um, it really destroyed Europe and Germany. Europe, no, just kidding. Germany and Japan is what I meant to say. They had the most damage. So the Americans used supplies of money, sent it to European countries that were the most damaged, but they sent the most money to the countries that pledged to stay away from communism. If you were actively rejecting communism, the United States gave you a little more help. Um, as Japan was being rebuilt, American forces stayed there to help with setting up the government, rebuilding the buildings and the infrastructure and the roads and all of that stuff. Douglas MacArthur was one of the main guys to stay and help and like put Japan back on course. This is also kind of how we repaired that relationship. Um, we did do so much destruction with the atomic bomb, and your papers were great, by the way. I got a lot of them. Not all of them. Not all of them, but the ones I did get were pretty good. Um, we had to find a way to help them after so much destruction that we did, giving them a ton of money and helping rebuild everything up was kind of our way of, I don't want to say apologizing, but like making up for it, if you know what I mean. Um, so Next, Germany was divided up into like four districts and then eventually settled into like two different countries. It was East and West Germany. This is where we hit like the Berlin Airlift and the Berlin Wall and um, these big conflicts that we'll get to later. And NATO was established, NATO Warsaw Pact. NATO is a North American treaty organization. Yeah. So we had like North American countries and European countries banding together against communism. And then in the Warsaw Pact, you had like the Soviet Union and Poland and Czechoslovakia and like other countries like that that were like supportive of communism. They came together to protect their way of life. So it was kind of, it goes along with this East versus West, freedom versus tyranny, NATO versus Warsaw Pact, like all of this stuff. So as you can see, it's clearly just rising tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. So we go into what is called the atomic age. Obviously, we use the atomic bombs to end World War II with Japan. And so now that we have it, Soviet Union wants it. Other countries think, oh, this is the new way that war is going to be fought. So we need to do this. So a bunch of different countries started working on these atomic weapons. This led to the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, building up their military, making it stronger. We're kind of just showing off to the other, like, "Eh, I have 2 guns. Oh, I have 10 guns. I have 20 guns, back and forth. Um, make ourselves look stronger. We want to look cooler, that kind of thing. Um, yeah. Okay. So communism is a political theory derived from Karl Marx and his life works. So this advocated this class war idea, leading to a society where all property is publicly owned, each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. It's a lot of co-ownership. Government takes control of things. They'll give you what you need. So there isn't this like super super high class. There's not a 1%, and there's not you know people in poverty when there's people with billions and billions of dollars. So this spread excessive fear in America. There were Soviet spies. There was one really well-known couple, the Rosenbergs, in in America that were known spies, and they were put on trial, and it was a whole thing. We'll talk about them. Then we have McCarthyism and the Red Scare. McCarthy was a United States senator that swore up and down that he had a list of all these Hollywood actors and high up officials that were known communist sympathizers and were spies. And so there was this mass panic in Congress for a while, and they were like, "Give us the names," and he was like, "No." Then they put him on trial, and it came out he didn't actually have any names, and it was a whole thing. But that's what we're going to talk about next week: the Red Scare and McCarthyism. So, let's look into really quick into the Korean War. This was the 1950s, 1950 to 1953. Again, an effort to stop the spread of communism. North Korea invaded South Korea over the 38th parallel. That's the line that divides the two countries. Um, this was the first actual military action of the Cold War. So keep in mind, World War II ended in 45. This is 1950. So 5 years after World War II ends, we have the Korean War starts. So the reason this is so important and the United States got involved is because we were allies with South Korea, but there was also a major fear that China and Russia were going to get involved. And if China and Russia get involved, we're probably going to start World War III only 5 years after World War II just ended. And the world was not ready for that. Um, Again, this mass fear came into play. So this act was seen as more than just an invasion. It wasn't like a massive military act. It was This is more than just an invasion, but this is a step towards communist campaign taking over the world. North Korea was known communist, and so them invading the country next to them kind of showed like, hey, communism isn't just this political ideation that stays in one place, it's something that's going to spread. And that is what the people were mostly afraid of, was the spread of it. So our containment policy like wasn't working. So again, 38th parallel crossing into the other Korea. This is Marilyn Monroe entertaining the troops. Sometimes I forget that like Marilyn Monroe and some of these um, famous people, you see them in one part of history. You see them in, for her sense, Hollywood. In, that's her job. She's in Hollywood. But then you see pictures like this of her with soldiers, and it kind of humanizes these people and um, puts the world into context. Like she wasn't just some actress in Hollywood. Like she lived at the time of the Korean War. She went over there. I don't know. I just think that's cool. Next, we get the Vietnam War. This was an effort to stop the spread of communism too. Communist North Vietnam versus South Vietnam. Again, very similar to Korea. It was a close ally of the United States. Um, the United States stepped in to help South Vietnam and to stop, again, the communist ideas being spread. This war greatly divided the United States citizens. Um, Most of you were in theater with me, and we watched Forrest Gump. And you know, at the one part when Forrest is he's like at DC right before he sees Jenny at the reflecting pond, and the guy's like, F Vietnam, effing Nam. That guy, that's a protest against the Vietnam War. So the Vietnam War ended by communist forces seizing South Vietnam and taking control in 1975. So again, this is a 20-year war of back and forth. 10 years after World War II ended, 2 years after Korea ended. This was a really hard time. Both sides, North Vietnam and South Vietnam, wanted a united single Vietnam. That was the goal. But the North Vietnam wanted it to be communist, the South Vietnam did not. So, again, that is where the issues are. Kind of comparable to our Civil War in the 1860s. Like the North wanted us to be together, but they didn't want slavery, and the South was like, we don't really need to be together, but we do want slavery. Um, I guess kind of like that. But anyway, so JFK he talked about this thing called the domino theory. If one South Asian country falls to communism, many others will continue in their footsteps. So Korea, Vietnam, these southern Asian countries, if they are falling to communism, it's only a matter of time before it moves into Europe, moves into South America, North America, all of these places. So we're coming back to that containment. Want to keep it contained, but with wars like Korea and Vietnam popping up, it's not working. Okay. So, oh, forgot I had those pictures of Vietnam. Okay. That's all I have for you. Make sure you do your quiz at the end of the week. It is on Classroom, and I'll email it to you. So let me know if you have any questions. Have a great week.